The growl wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that shook the very air of the high-security kennel. Behind the heavy steel mesh stood Smoky, a balmy kilogram powerhouse of black and tan fur. To the untrained eye, he was a monster, a cross between a German Shepherd and a Labrador Vekepite heart ears that stood like sharp flint and dark brown eyes that burned with a terrifying hyper-alert intelligence. Smoky was a legend among the Navy SEALs, but now he was a ghost of his former self. His posture remained perfectly upright, a soldier-esque stance, yet his soul was fractured by a trauma no one could reach. The military veterinarians shook their heads in despair. After the tragic loss of his handler in a mission that went unspoken, Smoky had become untameable. He was aggressive, prone to night terrors, and perceived every human hand as a threat. The order had been drafted, euthanasia. He was a weapon that could be turned off. But just as the shadows of the final needle loomed, a man stepped out of the sunlight. This was Wynne. At number years old, William was a pillar of a man, tall, muscular, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 secrets. His moss-green eyes, framed by deep crow's feet, looked at Smoky not with fear but with a recognition that only one warrior can give another. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. Before we continue this incredible journey of healing, if you believe that every animal deserves a second chance, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps us share these powerful stories with the world. Wynne stood before the kennel, his salt and pepper Bayou Deet cut gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His square-jawed face remained calm, despite Smoky lunging at the wire. William didn't flinch. He adjusted his short, boxed black and silver beard and took a deep breath, his sun-kissed, rugged skin showing the deep forehead wrinkles of a man who had seen too much. "He's not broken," William told the officers, his voice like gravel and silk. "Yes, just waiting for someone who speaks his language." William had served with Smoky's original handler. He knew that Smoky was a bad dog. He was a mourning soldier. Against all protocol and advice, William signed the papers, taking full responsibility for the lethal animal. As he led Smoky to his truck, the dog walked with a stiff, military precision, his muzzle long and strong, his eyes scanning for enemies in every shadow. The neighborhood feared what William was bringing home. They saw a predator. William saw a brother in arms who had been left behind. The first few weeks at William's secluded homes were a silent war. Smoky wouldn't eat if William was in the room. The dog stayed in the corners, his erect ears twitching at Mott for every gust of wind or creak of the floorboard. At night the house echoed with Smoky's muffled whines, the sound of a dog reliving battles in his sleep. William, sitting in his armchair with his moss-green eyes reflecting the dim light, understood completely. He, too, dealt with the quiet that felt too loud. He didn't force the dog to love him. He simply provided a safe perimeter. William's powerful jawline remained set in a mask of patience. He would sit for hours just breathing, showing Smoky that there was no need for the red alert anymore. He'd watch the Barmakilo Gamdog pace the living room, his black and tan coat rippling over lean muscle. Smoky was a masterpiece of a canine, yet he was a prisoner of his own mind. The neighbors watched from a distance, whispering about the seal and his wolf. They expected a disaster. They expected Smoky to snap. But the catalyst for change wouldn't be a trainer or a command. It would be the smallest, most fragile soul in the valley. Everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon when William's niece Lily was dropped off. Lily was 6 years old, with eyes that held a sadness far too heavy for a child. Since a traumatic accident a year prior, Lily had not spoken a single word. She was selectively mute, retreating into a world of silence where no one could hurt her. William was terrified. How could he keep this fragile child safe in the same house as a Bamikilogam K9 suffering from severe PTSD? He planned to keep Smoky locked in the reinforced outdoor run, but fate had other ideas. William, with his broad shoulders tense and his deep forehead wrinkles etched with worry, watched Lily through the kitchen window. She was sitting on the porch, her small hands clutching a worn teddy bear. Suddenly, the latch on the mudroom door, which hadn't been fully caught, clicked open. Smoky, the untameable beast, slipped out like a shadow. William's heart hammered against his ribs. He moved toward the door, his moss-green eyes wide with a sudden paralyzing fear. He was too far away. Smoky was already standing 3 feet behind the little girl, his long muzzle inches from her neck. William froze. He knew that a sudden shout might trigger Smoky defensive instincts. He watched breathless as the Bamie-kilogram German Shepherd-Lab mix stood perfectly still, his erect ears forward. Smoky gave a low, rumbling huff. Lily didn't scream. She didn't run. Slowly she turned around. The monster and the mute child stared at each other. To William's absolute shock, Smoky didn't growl. Instead, the dog lowered his head, his intelligent dark brown eyes softening into a look of profound curiosity. Then the shocking moment happened. Lily, who was terrified of even the smallest house cats, reached out her tiny hand. She didn't pull back. She placed her palm directly onto Smoky's long, strong muzzle. William held his breath, expecting the worst, but Smoky didn't snap. He did something he hadn't done since his handler died. He closed his eyes, let out a long, shuddering sigh, and leaned his weight against the little girl's knees. 2 broken souls had found a frequency that only they could hear. In that silence, the healing began, but a greater danger was already watching them from the tree line. In the days that followed, the house on the edge of the wilderness underwent a transformation. William Wynne, with his broad shoulders and moss-green eyes, watched from a distance as an incredible bond formed. It was a language without words. Lily would sit on the wooden floorboards, and Smoky, the Bamie-kilogram powerhouse, would lie beside her, his head resting on her lap. The dog's erect ears, once constantly twitching in hypervigilance, began to relax. For the first time in months, Smoky was T-pacing. He wasn't guarding against an invisible enemy. He was guarding a friend. William noticed that Smoky's night terrors had stopped. The dog no longer woke up, whimpering or snapping at the air. It seemed that Lily's quiet presence acted as an anchor for the traumatized K9. William's own rugged, sun-kissed skin seemed to lose some of its tension. He'd spent his afternoons grooming Smoky's black and tan fur, his square jaw set in a rare soft smile. He realized that Smoky hadn't needed a master, he had needed a purpose. And that purpose was now a 6-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a word, but whose eyes sparked with life whenever Smoky nudged her hand with his strong muzzle. As Smoky's aggression faded, his protective instincts sharpened into something refined and noble. He became Lily's constant shadow. When she moved to the kitchen, his paws clicked softly on the linoleum behind her. When she went into the garden, he stood at the perimeter, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning the tree line. William Wynne, leaning against the porch railing with his muscular arms crossed, saw the change. Smoky was no longer a broken weapon. He was a sentinel. The military training hadn't disappeared. It had found a new, peaceful application. William's salt and pepper bloodied cut caught the golden hour light as he watched the duo. He felt a deep sense of pride. He had seen the worst of humanity and the harshest of battles, but watching a lethal dog gently play tug-of-war, Vekepite a little girl's ribbon was the most profound thing he had ever witnessed. However, the wilderness surrounding their home was beautiful but unforgiving. Beyond the safety of the fence, the deep woods held secrets of their own, and something was watching the little girl and her black and tan protector with hungry amber eyes. The summer air was thick and still. William was busy in his workshop, his deep forehead wrinkles glistening with sweat as he worked on a piece of reclaimed timber. He felt safe knowing Smoky was with Lily in the backyard. What he did know was that a mountain lion, lean and driven by a harsh season, had been stalking the perimeter of the property for 3 days. It saw the small child as easy prey. It didn't care about the man in the workshop or the history of the house. It only saw the target. Smoky, however, felt the shift in the air before any human could. His perfectly upright posture became rigid, his long muzzle lifted, scenting the wind. He didn't bark. Barking was for domestic dogs. Smoky was a canine trained for stealth. He stepped in front of Lily, his black and tan fur bristling along his spine. Lily looked up, sensing Smoky's sudden tension. She reached out to touch his pointed ear, but for the first time, Smoky didn't lean into her touch. He was focused on the dense thicket of pines 20 yards away. The predator was moving, and the battle was inevitable. A sudden sharp crack of a breaking branch echoed through the yard. Lily, curious and unaware of the danger, took a step toward the tree line. Smoky immediately circled her, using his Barmy Kai Logoro Amo body to push her back toward the house. His dark brown eyes were no longer soft, they were the eyes of a warrior. William, hearing the low guttural growl, a sound Smoky hadn't made in weeks, dropped his tools. He ran toward the back door, his heart pounding against his ribs, his moss-green eyes searching the shadows. But he was too late to witness the beginning. The mountain lion, a blur of tan muscle and claws, launched itself from the brush. It didn't go for the dog, it aimed straight for the child. Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, the silence of her world finally broken by a sharp gasp. In that split second, the untamable dog didn't hesitate. Smoky didn't run for cover or hide behind his trauma. He launched himself into the air, a black and tan streak of fury, intercepting the predator mid-flight to shield the girl he loved. The collision was violent and silent, a clash of tooth and claw. Smoky and the mountain lion tumbled across the grass, a whirlwind of fur and dust. Smoky was smaller than the cat, but he had the heart of a seal and the precision of an elite soldier. He used his weight to pin the predator away from Lily, his strong muzzle locking onto the mountain lion's shoulder. He was taking hits, his black and tan coat being marked by the struggle, but he refused to let go. He was the shield, the wall between the innocent and the wild. If your ears moved by Smoky's bravery as we are, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us continue to tell these stories of incredible animals and their heroics. William Wynne burst onto the lawn, his powerful jawline tight with adrenaline. He didn't have a weapon, but he had the presence of a man who feared nothing. He let out a primal roar to distract the cat, but Smoky had already done the heavy lifting. The mountain lion, realizing it had picked a fight with a creature far more dangerous than a child, managed to twist away. It scrambled back into the darkness of the woods, defeated not by strength but by the sheer unyielding loyalty of a dog who had found his soul again. The silence that followed the mountain lion's retreat was heavier than the noise of the fight. William Wynne stood in the center of the yard, his chest heaving under his broad shoulders, his moss-green eyes darting between the tree line and the two figures on the grass. Smoky, the Bamie kilogram warrior, didn't immediately relax. He remained in a defensive crouch, his black and tan fur standing on end, his long, strong muzzle pulled back in a silent snarl toward the woods. He was making sure the threat was truly gone. Only when the rustling in the brush faded into nothing did the dog finally turn his head toward the little girl. William rushed over, his heavy boots thudding on the soil. He knelt down, his rugged, sun-kissed skin pale with shock. "Lily, Lily, look at me," he whispered, his voice trembling despite his military discipline. He checked her for any signs of injury, his square-jawed face etched with a paternal terror he hadn't felt in years. But Lily wasn't looking at William. She was staring at Smoky. The dog had a few tufts of fur missing and was breathing hard, but his intelligent dark brown eyes were fixed on the girl. He let out a soft, high-pitched whine, a sound of pure, raw concern that shattered the image of the untamable beast once and for all. What happened next was something William Wynne would remember for the rest of his life. For over a year, Lily had lived in a world of absolute silence, her voice locked away by the trauma of her past. She had survived a tragedy that had stolen her words, and every doctor had said it might take years for her to speak again. But as she looked at Smoky, the dog who had just risked everything to stand between her and a predator, something inside her clicked. Her small frame shook and her eyes filled with tears that finally began to spill over her cheeks. She reached out, her tiny fingers trembling as they touched Smoky's perfectly upright ears. William watched frozen, his deep forehead wrinkles softening as he witnessed the impossible. Lily's lips moved and a sound, small, raspy and fragile, emerged from her throat. "Good boy," she whispered. It was only 2 words, but they hit William like a physical blow to the chest. The shocking thing the little girl did wasn't just taming a wild animal. She had found her own soul again through the loyalty of a creature everyone else had given up on. Smoky reacted by gently licking the tears off her face, his tail giving a single rhythmic thump against the ground. William sat back on his heels, his moss-green eyes watering as he watched the bond solidify in the cooling afternoon air. He realized then that he had brought Smoky home to save the dog, but in reality it was Smoky who was saving them. As a 9-year-old veteran with his own internal scars, William had always believed that some things were too broken to be fixed. He looked at his own muscular hands, then at the black and tan dog who was now leaning his weight against Lily's side, providing her with the physical stability she needed to stop shaking. He stood up, his salt and pepper bayonet cut catching the last rays of the sun, and felt a profound sense of clarity. Smoky wasn't a weapon of war anymore. He was a bridge, he was the protector of the innocent. William realized that Smoky's PTSD hadn't made him dangerous, it had made him empathetic. The dog understood Lily's fear because he lived with it every day. As William led them both back toward the house, his powerful jawline was set with a new purpose. He wasn't just going to give Smoky a home, he was going to make sure the world knew that even the most aggressive souls are often just the ones who love the most fiercely. That evening, the atmosphere inside the house was different. Usually, the nights were filled with a tense quiet, but tonight there was a sense of peace that felt hard-earned. Smoky lay on a rug in the center of the living room, his long muzzle resting on his paws, his dark brown eyes following Lily as she moved about the room. He was exhausted, his barmy-kilogram body finally surrendering to sleep, but he kept one ear tilted toward the girl at all times. William, sitting in his chair, watched them both while the light of the fireplace danced across his rugged skin and deep wrinkles. Lily didn't stop with just 2 words. As she sat at the table eating her dinner, she pointed at Smoky and looked at William. "He brave," she said, her voice growing slightly stronger at each syllable. William nodded, his heart full. He reached down to stroke Smoky's black and tan coat, feeling the solid, reliable muscle beneath. He thought about the military trainers who had recommended euthanasia, and he felt a flash of anger followed by a deep, cooling relief. They had been so... Smoky wasn't a liability, he was a miracle. The dog looked up at William, and for the first time there was no suspicion in his gaze, only a deep mutual respect between 2 soldiers. Word of what had happened in the backyard began to spread through the small, tight-knit mountain community. People who had once crossed the street to avoid William and his wolf were now standing at the edge of his property, whispering in awe. They had heard about the mountain lion, a predator that had been terrorizing local livestock for months, and they knew that without Smoky the story would have had a much darker ending. The neighbors saw the tall, muscular man with the salt and pepper hair walking his dog, and they no longer saw a threat. William noticed the change in the way people looked at them. When he took Smoky for his morning walk, the dog's posture remained perfectly upright and professional, but he no longer growled at passing cars or lunged at shadows. Smoky walked his head held high, his intelligent eyes scanning the horizon with a calm authority. He knew he had a job to do and he knew he was loved, but as the community began to embrace them, a new challenge was brewing. A local official had heard reports of the aggressive dog and was coming to investigate whether Smoky was truly safe to stay in a residential area. The sound of a car door slamming echoed through the quiet valley, signaling the arrival of trouble. A man in a crisp suit holding a clipboard walked up the gravel driveway. This was Mr. Henderson from the County Animal Control. He had received a public safety concern report regarding an aggressive military dog involved in a violent encounter. William Wynne stepped onto the porch, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. His moss-green eyes were hard and his powerful jawline was set like granite. He didn't like strangers on his land, especially those who looked at Smoky like a liability instead of a hero. William's salt and pepper bloodied cut and the deep forehead wrinkles on his rugged face gave him an intimidating presence. "Can what help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Henderson looked nervous but held his ground, citing regulations about K-Chinese with a history of aggression. In the background, Smoky stood perfectly upright by the screen door. His black and tan fur was groomed and his erect ears were forward, listening to every word. He didn't growl, he didn't bark. He simply watched those intelligent dark brown eyes, as if he understood that this man held the power to take him away from the only family he had left. Henderson insisted on a temperament evaluation. He needed to see how Smoky reacted to stress and strangers. William felt a surge of protective anger, but he knew that resisting would only make things worse for the kilogram dog. He whistled softly, and Smoky stepped out onto the porch, walking with the disciplined military precision that was his trademark. The inspector pulled out a series of tools designed to startle animals, a loud siren, a heavy umbrella he snapped open suddenly, and a recording of aggressive barking. William watched, his muscular arms crossed, his moss-green eyes tracking Smoky's every move. Smoky didn't flinch. When the siren wailed, his pointed ears merely flickered. When the umbrella snapped open, he didn't lunge. He simply shifted his weight, keeping his long, strong muzzle pointed toward the inspector. He was a seal dog. He had survived mortar fire and helicopter extractions. A plastic umbrella was nothing to him. However, Henderson wasn't convinced. He too coiled, the inspector noted, scribbling on his clipboard. He's a weapon waiting for a trigger. It seemed the expert couldn't see the difference between a dog that was dangerous and a dog that was simply ready to protect. Just as Henderson was beginning to write a recommendation for Smoky's removal to a high-security facility, the front door creaked open. Lily stepped out. She looked tiny next to the muscular William and the powerful Smoky. The inspector stopped talking, surprised by the child's presence. He had heard the girl was mute and likely traumatized by the dog's presence. "Child, stay back," Henderson warned, thinking he was being helpful. "We don't know what this animal might do if he feels cornered by the law." Lily didn't stay back. She walked right up to Smoky and wrapped her small arms around his thick black and tan neck. She buried her face in his fur, and the aggressive dog immediately lowered his head, his dark brown eyes turning soft and warm. Then, looking directly at the inspector, Lily spoke. Her voice was no longer a whisper, it was clear and filled with a strange, ancient strength. "He is my brother," she said. "He saved me from the lion. He is not a weapon, he is my heart." Henderson's pen stopped moving. The shock of hearing the mute girl defend her protector was more powerful than any legal argument William could have made. The silence that followed Lily's words was profound. Even the birds in the nearby pines seemed to stop singing. William Wynne felt a lump in his throat, his rugged skin flushing with emotion. He placed a large calloused hand on Lily's shoulder, his moss-green eyes meeting the inspector's gaze. "You see," William said quietly, "this dog didn't just survive the war. He's ending the war inside this little girl. You take him and you break them both." The inspector looked at the clipboard, then at the Bamikilo Gamdog, who was now gently nudging Lily's hand, asking for a scratch behind his erect ears. Henderson sighed and closed his folder. He was a monster. He was just a man doing a job, and he knew when he was beat. "Mort le Glunk write the report," he muttered, a small smile finally breaking through his professional mind. "Mort le Glunk state that the dog is an essential service animal for a minor, with exemplary discipline under pressure. The case is closed." As the inspector drove away, William let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for decades. He looked down at Smoky, the dog who was supposed to be untameable, and realized they had finally won their hardest battle. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were a family. That night, as a cool breeze blew through the open windows of the mountain home, William Wynne sat on the porch steps. His salt and pepper hair was ruffled by the wind and his square jaw was relaxed. Smoky came to sit beside him, leaning his Bamikailogarura mo-frame against William's muscular. The dog's upright posture was still there, but the tension had vanished. They sat in the dark, two old soldiers who had found peace in the most unlikely of places. William reached out and scratched Smoky's long muzzle, feeling the scars from the mountain lion fight. "We re-staying, Smoky," William whispered into the night. "No more cages, no more missions, just this." Smoky let out a deep, contented sigh, his intelligent dark brown eyes reflecting the stars above. Inside the house they could hear Lily humming a soft tune, a sound that was once thought impossible. William realized that his purpose in life hadn't ended when he left the military. It had simply shifted. He was the guardian of this peace. He looked at his broad shoulders and realized they were finally carrying something light. Hope. But as they settled into this new life, a letter arrived the next morning that would call back the ghosts of Smoky's past. The letter sat on the reclaimed timber table, its official military seal looking like a cold eye staring back at William Wynne. William's moss-green eyes scanned the lines, his deep forehead wrinkles tightening they kepite hat every word. It was from Sarah, the widow of Marcus, Smoky's original handler. She had heard the rumours, the stories of the untameable dog who had been saved by a veteran and a little girl. She wasn't calling to take him back out of spite. She was calling because her own son, Marcus Jr., was struggling to remember his father. She wanted to meet the dog that had been her husband's shadow in his final moment. William felt a cold knot of anxiety in his stomach. He looked at his own muscular hands, then out the window at Smoky. The Bamikilo dog was sitting in his characteristic upright posture, watching Lily paint in the grass. If Smoky recognized the scent of his old life, would he leave them? Would the trauma come rushing back? William's powerful jawline set in a hard line. He knew he couldn't deny a fallen comrade's family the chance to see Smoky, but the fear of losing the peace they had fought so hard to win was overwhelming. He picked up the phone, his rugged skin pale, and made the call that would bring the past to his door. The days leading up to the visit were filled with a strange, heavy tension. Lily, though she had found her voice, was sensitive to the shift in the house. She clung to Smoky's black and tan fur, sensing William's internal struggle. William himself spent hours grooming the dog, making sure Smoky's coat was sleek and his long, strong muzzle was clean. He felt like he was preparing a soldier for an inspection. He looked at his salt and pepper bloodied cut in the mirror and saw the reflection of a man who was terrified of losing his best friend. "Smoky," William whispered one evening, looking into those intelligent dark brown eyes. "Your old family is coming. You remember Marcus, don't you?" At the mention of the name, Smoky's erect ears twitched sharply. A low, mournful huff escaped his chest, and he tilted his head. The doggette's memory was a library of scents and sounds, and Marcus was a volume he had never truly closed. Williamette's broad shoulders slumped. He realized that as much as he and Lily loved Smoky, they were only one chapter in this dog's heroic life. The question was, which chapter did Smoky want to stay in? The afternoon sun was high when a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. William stood on the porch, his tall, muscular frame casting a long shadow. Beside him stood Lily, holding his hand tightly. Smoky was at their feet, his black and tan body vibrating with a sudden, intense energy. As the car door opened, a young woman, Vekepite hat, tired eyes, stepped out, followed by a 7-year-old boy who looked exactly like the man William had served with. The boy was wearing his father's old military cap, which was much too large for his. The moment the boy's feet hit the gravel, Smoky's behavior changed. He didn't lunge or growl. Instead, he let out a sound William had never heard before, a long, melodic howl that sounded like a mix of grief and joy. The dog's perfectly upright posture broke as he trotted toward a car, his tail wagging so hard his entire Bami-kilo gam frame swayed. Sarah gasped, tears instantly filling her eyes. "He remembers," she whispered. The boy, Marcus Jr., froze as the large dog approached. For a second, William's heart stopped. He watched Smoky's long muzzle reach out to sniff the boy's hand the same way he had once sniffed Lily's. What followed was a scene that broke and mended William's heart all at once. Smoky was transformed. He rolled on his back in the grass, letting the little boy rub his belly, something he rarely allowed anyone to do. He chased the ball Marcus Jr. threw, his dark brown eyes bright with a youthful energy that seemed to strip away the years of PTSD. William watched from the porch, his moss-green eyes wet. He looked at Sarah, who was watching her son laugh for the first time in months. The bond between the dog and the boy was undeniable. It was a connection forged in blood and legacy. Lily stood beside William, her small face pale. She didn't try to join the play. She watched her best friend, her protector, giving all his attention to someone else. William felt a pang of protectiveness for his niece. He realized the impossible choice he might have to make. If Sarah asked to take Smoky home, could he say no? Could he deny a fatherless boy the only connection he had left to his hero dad? His rugged skin felt tight with the weight of the decision. He saw Smoky look back at the porch for a split second, his erect ears forward, checking on Lily before returning to the boy. As the visit drew to a close, the air became thick with an unspoken question. Sarah walked up to William, her eyes shifting between the dog and the silent girl on the porch. She saw the way Lily's hand was trembling, and she saw the way Smoky, despite his joy with Marcus Jr., kept returning to sit by Lily's side every few minutes. The Bami-kilo gam dog was torn between two loves, the memory of the man who trained him and the child who saved his soul. William tightened his grip on the porch railing, his powerful jawline rigid. "William," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her own loss. "Mort came here thinking Marcus Jr. needed this dog to remember his father." She paused, looking at Smoky as he gently nudged Lily's shoulder with his long muzzle. "But I see now that Smoky has a different mission here. My husband always said Smoky was a guardian. He's not just a memory of the past, he's the protector of this little girl's future." William's moss-green eyes widened. He looked at the salt and pepper dog, then back at Sarah. She was giving them the greatest gift a widow could offer, the peace of knowing Smoky was exactly where he belonged. As the silver SUV disappeared down the winding mountain road, a profound silence settled over the property, but it was the heavy, tense silence of the past. It was the quiet of a storm finally passing. William Wynne stood on the gravel, his broad shoulders finally relaxing from the defensive posture he had held all afternoon. Beside him, Lily hadn't moved. She still had one hand buried in Smoky's thick black and tan fur. The Bami-kilo dog leaned into her, his erect ears swiveling to catch the fading sound of the engine. He had recognized his past, honored it with a howl, but he had chosen to stay in his present. William looked down at Moph, his niece, and the untameable beast. He saw the way Smoky's dark brown eyes remained fixed on Lily, as if he were checking her vitals with his soul. "He's staying, Lily," William said, his voice thick with emotion, the deep wrinkles on his forehead smoothing out. "He's our family now for good." Lily looked up at her uncle, her eyes bright with a joy that no longer needed to be whispered. She didn't need to say anything. The way she squeezed Smoky's neck told the whole story. The mission was no longer about survival, it was about living. In the months that followed, Smoky became more than just a pet. He became a symbol of resilience for the entire community. William Wynne, with his powerful jawline and moss-green eyes, began taking Smoky and Lily into the local town more often. People no longer saw a dangerous predator when the Bamie-kilogram German Shepherd-Lab mix walked by with his perfectly upright military posture. Instead, they saw a guardian. Other veterans in the area, men who carried their own invisible scars, would stop William just to pet Smoky's head or look into his intelligent eyes. William noticed that Smoky had a peculiar gift. Whenever they encountered someone struggling, a stressed clerk or a lonely elder, Smoky would gently nudge their hand with his long, strong muzzle. He was using the very hyper-awareness that had once been labelled PTSD to detect the pain in others. William's rugged, sun-kissed skin seemed to glow with a new sense of pride. He realized that by saving Smoky, they hadn't just saved one dog, they had created a beacon of hope for everyone who felt broken or untameable. Smoky was a living testament that your past does not define your capacity to love. One autumn evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the mountains. In the past, the sound of thunder, so similar to the artillery of war, would have sent Smoky into a spiraling panic attack, causing him to growl and hide in the darkest corners. William sat in the living room, his muscular frame tense, prepared to comfort the dog. But as the first crack of thunder shook the windows, something different happened. Smoky didn't run, he didn't snap. Instead, he immediately went to Lilia's bedroom door and stood guard. William watched from the hallway, his salt and pepper bloodied cut silhouetted by the lightning. He saw Smoky walk into the room, climb onto the foot of Lili's bed, and lay his heavy head across her feet. The dog was still alert, his pointed ears twitching, but he remained calm. He was choosing his duty as a protector over his own fear. William realized then that the shocking thing about this dog wasn't just his strength or his training, it was his will. Smoky had conquered the ghosts of the battlefield not through medicine, but through the pure, unadulterated need to be there for a little girl who needed him. As Lily's 7th birthday approached, she was no longer the mute girl the town once pitied. She was talkative, vibrant, and always accompanied by her black and tan shadow. William Wynne, looking at his square-jawed reflection in the window, realized how much he had changed too. The crow's feet around his moss-green eyes were now from smiling, not squinting into the sun for enemies. He had spent 50 years being a soldier, but Smoky had taught him how to be a father figure. The house, once a fortress of solitude, was now a home filled with laughter and the rhythmic thump of a Bamie-kilogram tape. William began a small program on his land, inviting other veterans to bring their dogs for training and companionship. He used Smoky as the lead instructor. Seeing the Bamie-kilogram dog with the perfectly upright posture demonstrating calm and discipline helped other men realize that their own beasts could be tamed. William's broad shoulders now carried the responsibility of leadership once again, but this time the goal wasn't a victory in combat, it was victory in peace. He had found his true north, and it was guided by the intelligent dark brown eyes of a dog the world had tried to throw away. The story of the untameable seal dog and the little girl who spoke to his soul became a legend in the valley. On a quiet evening, William, Lily, and Smoky sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the peaks. Smoky sat between them, his black and tan coat shining, his muzzle long and strong, held high with the dignity of a decorated veteran. He looked at William, then at Lily, and let out a soft, contented huff. He was no longer a weapon, he was a soul at rest. The shocking truth wasn't that a little girl could tame a beast, it was that there was never a beast to begin with, only a hero who was waiting for a reason to come home. William Wynne placed his hand on Smoky's head, feeling the warmth and the life. They had all been broken in their own ways, but together they were whole. As the stars began to poke through the velvet sky, the three of them sat in the perfect healing silence of a family that had finally found their way out of the shadows and into the light.
The channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.